Hi, I'm Seamless, and it's time for another How to Bass tutorial. And today I'm going to show you how to make this sound. Just wanted to demo in a couple of registers. So if you caught that last How to Synth tutorial, then you probably already are familiar a little bit with how it is that I made this. But am I just ever so excited about this tech? Oh man. It's interesting to control, but once you get like the hang of it, the list is okay. The list? What the heck am I talking about? This is taking advantage of a lot of very special things Harmor can do. Basically, every of the special additive per harmonic actions that can happen in a module, I'm attempting to utilize. And it created the awesomeness of this sound. And I changed this path near the very end of the choice here, in the sense that, oh hey, this is random it says, in the sense that I put the Prism after the harmonizer and the phaser, when originally it was before the phaser. The harmonic mode inside the phaser and Harmor makes it respond to pitch changes, and Prism is a pitch changer, according to the map that I got here. So that activity shows up in a particularly interesting way, even if you do it by the default system. I'll walk you through how that goes. So I'm also utilizing the filter noise system, and I also made a custom noise or a custom filter shape. Looked kind of like this. I guess it looked sort of like this. Yeah. And then I automated it. This is how the talking began. I engaged our noise. I also made sure to go into the filter 1 resonance mask, which is applied to the noise, and turn it off because I need my dots to be dotty. And this is even now when I had to begin caring about unison. Because the way that this noise works, it has a speed and whatnot, but I tend not to want to leave it at one speed. And if I want more than one speed kind of action on each other, I either got to layer it or I have to engage randomness per unison voice and get unison involved. And then go in here to articulator into unison index mapping, which controls this value's position per unison voice. So lower, faster. You can kind of hear them both doing it. And if I just keep adding voices, you can see the pillars increasing, and this is giving us more voices with different speed values. And eventually it's pretty well a blur. But we're going to make it blurrier. So step 2, let's also make sure our speeds are aligned. Cool. So ramping involves declicking, like it says, but it's per harmonic and timed at speed to be relevant to the rate of frequency oscillation, so that it doesn't cut a low one too fast or cut a high one too slow. What else? This guy that says it does, it's for automating this and how snappy it is. And then this is for when you have maps. I kind of just by default bring this down. And by maps, I mean if you ever do one of these, like a curve. So like this straight line, that would have no value to me if I changed what this thing does. Because this is the envelope granularity, which controls how actually fine this curve is. By default, it's not as perfect as this visual is giving us. It's actually like beep, 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 little points. And how frequently those points are there is this value. The lowest value is half a millisecond. So that means a point every half a millisecond is actually what this line is. And if you can't tell that it's a problem if it's there, you want slower values because it's more CPU to read that fast. I just keep it on by default because that's usually what I do. Yeah. Plugging. So next step was to put on the blur. I guess I'm doing this point by point. I was just going to demonstrate the Prism thing, but I guess we're doing this. Yeah, so first up is blur. So we're going to put filter 1 way at the bottom here. You can scroll to move these positions. And then we're going to take our blur. And in case you're curious what this guy does, it spreads the harmonics up and down, whereas these actions spread the harmonics side to side. And then we even get our two knobs essentially up and down. Well, that's on. So that's what that's for. After this, I also utilized that unison index mapping on a lot of these parameters. I did things like I changed the width to be different, not for randomness exactly, but for these settings I made sure to keep the shape to look like this, so that the center value has a value, and then that the stereo values are the same value for left and right. I'm actually still just assuming that this middle thing is the center value, and that this first point is the center value. You do want the center value to be like surrounded by symmetry on things that are large and obvious, like a big filter. So the next thing after this is to get the Prism involved. So let's talk about what the Prism does. Just moves the pitch around pretty directly. It has some special powers down here though, and it just multiplier and straight. And also I changed the map because this is the map by default. Just turns it up, turns it down based on the pitch and where it is. And I usually just delete it. And it makes kind of just a smaller, not so super adjustment. This is where the bassy stuff is. And you don't really want that to be thrown around so hard. But what I do is I assign this value to one of these dudes, which represents giving us the power of our prism, but weighted as though I was moving this knob based on the level of the harmonic that it's getting. So what that means is that when the blur creates an attack into the on-off as, the on-off made up of the noise, it's getting us on-off of the prism value, but per harmonic, and that's super cool. So now, after that, you stick a prism, or rather the phaser. So in the last video, you guys were you were pointing out how it kind of looked like a 3D render a bit, and look at this outrun looking, like there's mountains and it's like perspective-y when I did that just then. And it's because when this pitch moves, it changes the sort of position on this phaser here. So this looks like it's like a extra dimension relationship, because it is. It's actually, its position is being controlled by an extra dimension that we are looking at existing here. And because we can see all that at once, it gives us the illusion of depth. Isn't that fantastic? But while this is on, if I alter the prism's power, well, it does that while I move it, but it also alters the phaser's position per harmonic, and it looks different. And this massive pile of differences that I'm accumulating are tones that my idea here was I was going to macro them all together and get this kind of on-off situation. But this is kind of dark sounding, isn't it? It's neat and it moves, and when I automate stuff, it's pretty sweet, but it's just extremely dark. And this is where distortion normally takes place. However, what does distortion do? Distortion takes lower frequency information and multiplies it in its higher values. So you'd see like this guy, and then this half again up here, and then half again, and then half again, all the way up to the top. And the harmonizer is exactly the thing that does this. Albeit perfectly and weirdly, so it doesn't quite sound like distortion, but you can futz with it by messing with this harmonizer shaper here, which I just randomize until it sounds good. And then I macroed that too. But in particular, I macroed it slightly less. So when I do a macro, this is how the macro is done. You apply it to a value, and there it is. For the harmonizer though, what I did was I delayed its action. The reason I did that is because I wanted it to be like, there's this motion and then there's this extra tinge of high frequency that's up there with it, and not just that tone is just on the whole time. Now we can go to the other guys. This is when we can start talking about specifics. So observe the changes I made though, because here's the blur, and here's the phaser, and here's the harmonizer, and then there's the prism. That is not the order that I just described. How the heck ever? Did you notice how strange, like, you see how flat this is, and you see how flat that's not? If I wanted that to not be flat, all I'd have to do is take the prism and put it past it. Because now that level of information is harmonics that are being fed into this particular system per harmonic. And that's why in this other dude, up in this high bit, we can see that, so like we have the wide berth of the lower frequency information, and then the harmonizer's sort of in between it because it's thinner on the macro, but it's still moving as though it has the same center. And this has the impact of taking that smooth metallic sheen and turning and squelching it and making it sound like it wasn't actually the harmonizer's edition anymore. Then that's it. It's a little bit like your FMing distortion in post. Actually, by a little bit, I mean it's exactly like your FMing distortion in post. What's happening here with the Prism when it kind of changes position like this? You can make a thing do this with FM. You would just need a lot of oscillators and they'd be at a bunch of weird pitches. But they could do this. And if you were to do this to like a distorted signal with a lot of complicated tonality and whatnot, it's basically what it would sound like. You guys experience this all the time when you use Serum and you get up a wavetable and you FM it. And it's a reason why it sounds squelchy. And the Prism is pretty well like the thing that's designed just to get that effect. In fact, it's set up by default to do that. But did you notice how when I held it on there, it just kind of went away after it started squelching? And it's because it's phase cancellation that's causing this effect, and if it just continues, it won't stay there. If you wanted it to stay there, you can come to the envelope and basically turn it off fast enough that once it gets to the squelch, it doesn't go away. It doesn't continue to move. And then have a little bit of room left so that there actually is motion. And now you got a squelchy sound. This is a slightly less specifically squelchy sound because this sort of like wavy line shape that comes in here is pretty well what the spectrum looks like if we were to look at like the side banding information from FMing on a thing. But this isn't that necessarily, but because it's pitch change and it's related, it's like that. And also because I'm doing this with the unison. This little relationship. This is being macroed though. This is being part of the macro. What else is part of the macro? This is part of the macro. This is part of the macro. Ooh, I'm inverting it. So what's happening here is you can see how it's like coming into the center position. It's actually out of pitch and then coming into pitch for when the top end tops out. And the reason why we're not hearing the calamitous mess down there is because I'm also macroing the volume. And I have the separate sub happening on this other side over here. I have protection still on though, because I do want that to be in the system, but only when it's part of the macro like this. This choice actually went a long way to cleaning up the sound. This is what it sounds like without it. It's kind of insane, but Jesus. Doing this kind of volume automation on literally any pile of noise is a pretty good like macro saver. If like you just have a lot of processes and the low end of it is dark and gross, just not have it. That's pretty well the solution there. What else is important? Okay, so I am modulating the width of the phaser down, which is a bit like doing pulse width modulation. And by a bit, I mean exactly. See, this is something about, I keep trying to be like, oh, this is mimicking certain situations, but it's really not. It's just doing them. It's just doing the results of them, but without the process that created them. It's still it, though. It's really strange to think about in that regard. I also am automating the phaser offset just the whole way. Like I'm just moving the whole knob. And a big reason why I like using the phaser, especially when I'm doing like talky wobby sounds, is because when you saw how when I just did the two like big peaks in the filter shape and that other guy, that it didn't sound terribly talky. But when you not only create a shape, but then create shapes in the shape, and then create motion in those shapes that's not the motion on the main shape, that's what makes a thing sound like it's talking. And that, well, more than that, like that's what makes the thing sound like it has an accent. Let's put it that way. And so like you want to have those subtleties kind of engaged, but they all want to kind of be less than the main deal. And that's how you get, but like those systems just do that. It just makes it, and it makes it relevant. It makes it relevant to the thing you're doing, which is also another thing that makes it work so well. I love Harmor so much. Now, here's something special. I didn't distort this. I distorted only with what comes out of the burning version of this compressor, which is a little bit of distortion, of course. I also jacked the volume way up, and that's because when when you use enough of this volume attenuation on the sound and you just have 6 of them, it's actually not very loud. So I had to like jam and then also jam. And this is actually pretty regular. Anytime I've ever used this compressor inside Harmor, the low end is always way higher and harder than everything else. But honestly, that's just because the low end has better phase cohesion, even though I crossfaded almost all the way over to A. To taste, figure it out. So let's talk about the noting here and this shape and why this one is not sharp and the rest of them are. So like, for example, would you please? Oh, of course you're gonna freaking turn off snap. So if I just hit play, it's not sharp, but if I let it go, it is, but only in the middle and not there. What's up with that? Well, what's up with that is we're blurring things. The filter action that we have is before the blur, and the blur creates just a teensy bit of attack. This is not something that can be helped by just putting another filter after the fact because it's straight up delaying. There's just no attack. This is a very long attack in the beginning, which is why when this guy hits, you don't really get it. You're not getting the actual impact. But when this guy hits, you're not either until it's held down long enough to be on, and then the next one automates while the note is sustained. Then you can hear it. Not even after it stops and the next one hits do you hear it. However, it just kind of sounds rhythmically neat. It's not even that big of a downfall. But if you want that squelch to maintain, like that, you have to put new notes down because it's a product of when it was in phase and now it's not. Yeah. So that was that sort of rationale just to figure that one out. What else is important about this? I mostly wanted to get the bit about this being distortion and about using it like distortion and using this like FM after distortion and using this. I talked about the blur. I talked about the blurring in both directions. So that's good. Yeah, actually, that's it. That's it for this sound. I engaged randomness per unit of voice. I think I mentioned that. I have randomness on up here. I pointed out that the harmonic randomness is like, I think it's weird that it's a module because I'm not totally sure how it would change if it's not here. I will find out. Same thing with like the volume articulation being in various places. Also, actually, here it is. This actually wasn't like this in the beginning. I'm pretty sure harmonic protection was here first. And what I did by putting it after the volume, or after it, was making sure that while this was on, it was still going to be affected by the volume modulation. That's what I needed to have happen. Yeah. Cool beans. So this is just one Harmor preset. It'll be available to be downloaded in the description of this video. If you have any questions about this, boy, am I ever ready for that. I love talking about this. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and all that good stuff. But as usual, have a nice day.